Thank you. Thanks, Hal. So I'll get going quickly because I've only got 10 minutes. So, how to make the perfect decision, because everybody wants to make a perfect decision, right? So the reason this is important, we're making decisions all the time, personal life, in our private life, in our work lives, but as software delivery professionals, people who work in software, we do decision-making all the time, right? You could argue one of the best ways I think of describing like software architectures specifically is that they're just the sum total of all the decisions that got made throughout the course of that software delivery. Big decisions, small decisions, decisions that you made on your own, decisions that you made collectively, decisions you made on purpose or decisions you made by accident, things that you were proud of, decisions and decisions that you weren't so proud of. But the whole point is we're making decisions all the time. And I mean like big architectural decisions like the ones that end up on whiteboards and even small ones like what's the data type used in an API. So I've started using this it's called the design thinking squiggle, but it's a nice way of thinking about deciding because it definitely feels when we're trying to figure out what to decide that we're in that kind of spiky squiggle bit. And so the key points in this diagram are that there's a starting context, is where you are when you realize you have to take a decision. You then wander around this kind of squiggly bit doing all of the things that you would try and do to figure it out. You probably or hopefully come up with multiple options, and then you pick one, and then you code it up. So the easy bit is the straight line after you've picked the option that you're going to pick. But there's something else, right? So this is the point. We're in the deciding part, there's the implementing part. However, because of the nature of software and the fact that we know that big design up front is definitely not a way to do it. We can't make all the decisions at the start. What we're actually doing is we're making decisions one after the other, ongoing again and again and again. And then when we've made those decisions, the kind of outcomes of the option we picked becomes the context for the subsequent decision. And most of the time we get it right, but sometimes we don't get it right. So that's why this talk exists, because people have done lots of talks about this, and there's a book I'll mention at the end, which I wrote. We do this so often, everybody wants to know how to get it right. Because if you get it wrong, you need to go back, and you need to make more decisions. So it's hard, right? It's definitely maybe the fun part of our job, but it's definitely the hard part of our job. The reason it's definitely hard is because we never do this on our own. Unless we're like coding on our own on our personal project, or we're the first hire in a new startup, there's a bunch of people making decisions. There's a bunch of people in my team making decisions, but you never work in an organization, or rarely work in an organization, where it's just one team. So there's loads of teams all doing this thing over and over again, trying to navigate this problem space to come up with the solutions, to come up with the code, which is our running systems, and we bump into each other. So it's definitely a good reason to know how to make the perfect decision. So, what are the aspects of that perfect decision? So clearly, and hopefully none of this comes as a surprise to you, but I'm going to kind of enumerate it, the first thing you need is the right information. So when you're at the starting point, that dot at the start, what do you need to know? And typically, what you'll want is, although you'll hear engineers say frequently, I don't know what the requirements are, but you'd like to know what the requirements are, the hopes, the things that your decision is trying to solve, or the solution you're trying to create. What do you need this decision to do? And also there'll be constraints, right? What can't we do? So on top of the awareness, which is your context, you'll also want to involve the right people, because it's very infrequent that we know everything that we need to know, because software is a team sport. You want to get the right people involved. And in my experience, the people you really want to get involved are those who are affected by your decision. So a good way of thinking about this is, if I decide to do this, what other teams are going to have to put a ticket on their backlog to respond to it, or who controls the money is going to tell you that you've just spent money that didn't belong to you. And experts, because the affected people might not be everyone. There's also always someone who's like, I wouldn't do it like that, because 70 years ago when I wrote COBOL, we'd learned that this was a problem.
And if you're enjoying this, LeadDev has a ton more to offer.
I'm quite fond of the articles.
I feel like LeadDev blogs are my favorite, and it's been really, really useful to kind of create these more meaningful connections as well.
If there's something you're struggling with as an engineering leader, there's a pretty good chance that LeadDev has published something that addresses it.
So make sure you check out leaddev.com.
So, let's start thinking about a decision if we were bringing all these things together, right? So what you want to do is you think about your ideal current context, where you think you are, where you wish you are. You're also hopefully going to start thinking about the future, where you'd like this decision to go, because that's going to guide where you produce your options. There'll be some constraints that you'll take into account. You'll then also probably think about the past and remember some things, because obviously if you've got a bunch of smart people who can remember what happened in the past, you want to factor that in. That might, again, bring more constraints, right? You then probably want to think about what your actual current context is, because lots of people will draw things, and I'm included in this, a beautiful design on a whiteboard, and then you'll speak to an engineer who will tell you that that's not actually how the code got implemented, so therefore it's slightly different, which will give you more constraints, because someone got told to write the code really fast, and all of that beautiful design, which everyone hoped to get into prod, didn't get into prod. Then there might be some other things where you think they're constraints, but if you're thinking about your option space, you're thinking about the ways you might do things. Maybe the fact that you're only supposed to use AWS and you're not allowed to use Azure, maybe there's a reason why in this circumstances you can use Azure, right? For some good business reason. So therefore, you need to bring in some other external context, other things that are important. Also, I mentioned a minute ago, you want to speak to other people. So Mary in Team A definitely knows about this because you're going to change an API, which is going to make Mary's life difficult. Sammy in Team T is also going to be affected by this, so we're going to speak to Sammy, who might be in a platform team or something. So now we're also bringing in the context of other people. We need to speak to architects. I'm an architect. Diana's a systems architect, so I'm maybe thinking about things in my team, but we need to think about the people who are trying to maintain this overall contextual integrity. So we're going to speak to Dana. We all love speaking to product. Diana and Kat don't famously get on, but important, we need to bring all of their things in, which means the market context needs to be brought in. We then, like I said, we need to speak to experts, because Trond is the person who wrote that COBOL 300 years ago, and he knows what will and won't work. So that's even more external context. Then, now we've really broadened out the possibilities of our option space, we need to remember what we're actually capable of doing with the skills and the time that we've got available. We obviously need to not forget about users, because users are super important, which brings in even more external context. And then this will kind of bring up things like unforeseen constraints, things that we hadn't even really thought about, but now we think about. Then someone tells us we need to do this by the end of the next week, so we have a time constraint. We also get reminded that we shouldn't break the law, so we need to bring in regulatory constraints. We also, if we're doing this well, we need to remember our egos and not get too carried away, because sometimes we think we're better at delivering software than we are. There's our biases, which again might tell, for example, I'm a Java dev, let's always write in Java. Ethical constraints, because we build really powerful software. There's also a bunch of things that nobody knows, something that you never foresaw, something that nobody foresaw, and based on the way the world's going at the moment, events that we never imagined. The point I'm trying to make is, you can't do this. This is too hard, right? There's so much to consider. There's too much to consider. And it's because, and we forget this all the time, because software itself, although the talk for this was great, code is deterministic. But as soon as we build systems with it, it becomes very non-deterministic. And the way of kind of expressing this is that software decisions, the clickers, start working, are wicked. And I don't mean like the musical, I mean there's actually a definition of wicked problems that cannot be fixed, there's no single solution, and it's resistant to resolution, right? So we need to acknowledge that. So, what is a decision? Here's a good definition, but the thing you need to remember is a decision is just a guess. Until it gets into code and is running somewhere, you're just hoping that it'll be what it is. So therefore, how do we perfectly decide? The spoiler alert is you can't. There is no perfect decision in software, so looking for it isn't going to solve it. But there is a cool thing that you need to bear in mind. Code wins arguments. So that means what you do is you decide and then get it into code, get it into production, and that removes your unknowns. So therefore, this is how you make sure you close the loop on your decision process, right? You don't close it when you've got to the end of the squiggle. You close it when you've got to the end of the straight line, because you get feedback. So therefore, how do you make sure you do that as quickly as possible? You need to add a few more things. Number one, you need the right execution. You need to build what you've decided and put it into code. You need to flow that down to prod, or at least in some environment where you can get feedback as quickly as possible. And you want to be able to flow well if you've got the right autonomy. So therefore, the best way to do execution is build your example, maybe it's a spike or maybe it's the real thing, in its functional context. You need to validate as soon as possible, so it's not a guess, it's a reality. And you need to be as independent as possible to get things going. The best way to do this, and this is how to get to the best decisions, you can start doing your deciding in public, because there's nothing like writing something down on a wiki to get loads of people to tell you that you're completely like living in cloud cuckoo land. As soon as you accept an ADR, people from finance and regulatory will definitely come out of the woodwork and tell you that you definitely can't do that. And that leaves one final question. What are the best things to prioritize? Because there's lots of decisions. The best things to prioritize are not just the product value, because product management will tell you this. It's how quickly can you deliver the overall software, how much is the overall product going to cost, what's the expense of it building this thing, and the technical risk. What's the risk of us getting this wrong? And that adds one final thing. You should prioritize the decisions that if you don't decide them at the start and you decide them late, it's going to cost you a lot. That's what you need to focus on. So therefore, instead of doing one big decision, break your decisions into lots of small decisions, which will give you all the feedback all the way along. And that's my talk. Go and do decisions, but go and do small decisions, accept you're not going to get it right, and learn from the feedback. And this is the best quote that I've ever read in a book. Fast and wrong is better than slow and correct, because that triggers architects, because we like to think really hard and can be convinced we're smart. Admit that you are not as smart as you think, and just get stuff down into code as rapidly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.